welcome to this morning's Queensborough President's Remote Land Use Public Hearing. This hearing is being live streamed on the link from the webpage of the Office of the Queensborough President at www.queensbp.org. Once again, www.queensbp.org. For those who wish to testify and haven't already pre-registered for speaking time, you may do so by visiting www.queensbp.org/land use. www.queensbp.org/land use. Please note your opportunity to speak will follow those who are pre-registered. Written testimony is welcome from those who are unable to testify remotely. All written testimony must be received by 5 p.m. today and may be submitted by email to planning@queensbp.org. I'll say that again, planning@queensbp.org, or by conventional mail sent to the Office of the Queensborough President at 120-55 Queens Boulevard, room 226, Kew Gardens, New York, 11424. I'm joined by my planning director and staff, Irving Poi, Lisa Atkins, Victoria Garvey, and Vanessa Ordonez. Lisa, please review how this public hearing will proceed.
Yes. The public hearing shall be conducted in the following manner. For each item, the applicant will be called to give a description of the zoning action requested, an explanation of the proposed project, and respond to any questions from the chair. The floor will then be open for public testimony. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to state their position. A signal will be heard when 3 minutes have passed. When you are called, please state your name for the record, and if you are officially speaking as a representative of an organization or a member of a group, the calendar number or application you are speaking about, and whether you are for or against the item. Then begin your testimony. Speakers will be called to testify in an alternating basis for and against that item. At the discretion of the chair, should there be a large number of speakers on any particular item, it may be put on second call. Thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you, Lisa. You have just been advised on the proceedings of this hearing and how it will be conducted. Please keep your comments focused on the application you are speaking about. Please stay within the allotted 3 minutes. When you hear the signal, please wrap up and finish your comments. The chair reserves the right to ask speakers for clarifications or further information regarding the application or comments. Lisa, please call the first calendar item.
Certain. Calendar item number 1, ULURP number N210095ZRY. The applicant is New York City Department of City Planning. Effective community boards number 1 through 14. Please begin.
Good afternoon, Borough President Richards and the whole team. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm Alexis Wheeler, the Deputy Director of the Queen's Office of City Planning, and we're here before you today to present the details of what is the culmination of about 8+ years of studied and collaborative work on creating a more resilient New York. And so I'm joined today by my team members, Manuela Paladaico, who is our zoning expert, as well as Hala Salah, our community board liaison for Board 14, and Joy Rezor, our community board liaison for Board 10. Thank you so much for your time today.
So we'll now share the slides. Can everyone see it? Perfect. So thank you so much for your time today. We're very excited to present this. So as you're aware, at this point, the Borough Board and majority of your boards have received individual presentations about this proposal and provided recommendations, which I'll summarize at the end of the presentation today. Thank you so much for your hard work on this effort. So today I'll provide just a quick overview about zoning for coastal flood resiliency, and Joy will speak about the local action at Old Howard Beach, which is following the same timeline as the citywide proposal. So before we start, it is important to remind ourselves that while there are many sources of flooding that poses issues in New York City, coastal storms present the most significant flood risk in terms of compromising human safety, property damage, and business disruption. So when we are analyzing the city's coastal risk, we focus on the area that FEMA designates as the high-risk flood zone, the area that has a 1% of risk of being flooded every year. However, in 2012, Hurricane Sandy awakened us to a more widespread that went well beyond that area. Close to half of properties they're technically classified as being at moderate risk of flooding or having a 0.2% of chance of flooding were inundated. So with climate change, the floodplain will continue to expand. By the 2050s, today's moderate risk floodplain will likely be the high risk flood zone, the area that today is home to almost 1 million New Yorkers. So to tackle this risk, the city is pursuing a strategy that involves multiple lines of defense. The city work includes coastal defense strategies, protection of our inland infrastructure, and advanced emergency preparedness. But the focus of this project is to help advance the resilience of our building stock. So this proposal, as Alexis mentioned, builds upon 2 zoning text amendments and a lot of outreach that we conducted in the several years after Hurricane Sandy. Those zoning flexibilities that were put in place were passed as a temporary emergency measure that are beginning to expire. The Department of City Planning conducted years of research and outreach, which uncovered many issues that communities are still facing. So the proposal now is to make many of those provisions added after Sandy permanent, but also to expand them so communities have even greater flexibility for adaptation. Ultimately, zoning for coastal flood resiliency will help those living and working in the city's floodplain to reduce damage from future coastal storms, be resilient in the long term by accounting for future risks from including climate change, and potentially help save on flood insurance costs. So the proposal, I would also add, it would assist with disaster recovery from future disasters, including the present situation with COVID-19. So after a long process of studying the floodplain and engaging with more than 3,000 New Yorkers on a wide set of issues, we were able to establish 4 overarching goals that you can see here in the slide. First of all, we know that the floodplain community wants to be able to prepare buildings for flooding, even if they're not located in what FEMA determines to be the current high-risk flood zone, especially those located in the areas that also face risk and face moderate risk of flooding, but also experienced coastal flooding from Sandy. People also want the option to raise their occupiable space a little bit higher than what the current flood level that FEMA projects that you can find in the flood insurance rate maps. And again, this is because they have seen higher flood levels and expect that risk to grow in the future. When people are undertaking big investments to retrofit the buildings where they live, they only want to do that once. And speaking of that investment, one has to pursue when fully retrofitting to resilient standards, the third point is really crucial here. Residents and business owners are seeking options to invest in resiliency incrementally, so it's more affordable. They want options like moving their mechanical equipment to a higher elevation without necessarily triggering a requirement to raise or fully flood-proof a structure. Lastly, after undertaking the 2 zoning text amendments for resiliency, we really know that we need a way for the city to be nimbler in responding to future events that might require rebuilding homes or even other forms of recovery. So starting with goal number 1, which speaks to the text applicability of the proposed regulations, it is important to note that these regulations are optional and would only be facilitating buildings to meet or even exceed flood-resistant construction standards set by FEMA and enforced by New York City's building code in Appendix G. So ZCFR would be expanding the applicability of the current text to a broader set of buildings that are also exposed to flooding in the event of coastal storms, by allowing any lot located within both the 1% and the 0.2% annual chance floodplain to have access to the proposed special rules that help enable resilience at the building scale. The 0.2% floodplain serves as a proxy for the high-end projection of the 2050's 1% annual chance floodplain, allowing the city to advance resiliency in the longer term, as it would allow those living in these areas to proactively undertake resilience improvements, even if not required by the city's building code. So regarding goal number 2, this section illustrates regulations that will be available only if the building fully complies with Appendix G of the building code. And we split it into 5 subcategories, as you can see here. Starting with building envelope, the set of rules would allow building owners to physically elevate habitable spaces and other building support features above expected flow elevations by offering more flexibility with bulk regulations, height, yards, and floor area, so buildings can be made resilient without putting homeowners in a hard spot when potentially having to choose between keeping their whole building versus making their homes more resilient. Regarding ground floor regulations, the set of rules would help promote good long-term resilient design of buildings and how they meet the sidewalk. Through floor area exemptions, the proposed rules would encourage internal access and active uses to be kept at the sidewalk level as much as possible, so floodplain communities continue to be vibrant and accessible. And as a reminder, all these allowances can only be used if buildings fully meet Appendix G to ensure that buildings meet the full resilience standards. In addition to that, to ensure that buildings continue to contribute to their surroundings, we would also be mandating that a set of streetscape requirements are met so that the ground floor level design of resilient buildings is improved. And moving forward to speak about situations where neighborhoods and buildings may be old and not fully comply with our current rules, leaving residents in these areas in a really hard position when trying to undertake resilience improvements. An example of that are homes currently located on substandard lots, which may not comply with floor area or yard regulations. The proposal would set up a framework that would allow these and many other situations in which buildings do not conform with our use regulations or do not comply with our bulk regulations to be able to be retrofitted without bumping into zoning constraints. And last, on the goal number 2, with such a vast and diverse building stock and construction in the floodplain, we recognize that not all buildings in all situations will be helped by our as-of-right rules. Therefore, the proposal will continue to offer discretionary pathways in the form of BSA special permits to ensure that all unique situations are enabled to meet the standards for construction in the floodplain. Now moving on to goal number 3. The set of provisions located within these 4 categories are what we call partial resiliency strategies, as they assist buildings undertake incremental steps towards resiliency without requiring the structure or sites to meet the full set of rules in Appendix G of the building code. So we really learned that raising mechanical equipment is often the first step to make buildings more resilient. So the proposal would enable more options for the placement of equipment above the flood level, either on top of roofs, which is a common strategy for larger buildings, or in a separate structure, common strategy for large sites, or even smaller buildings that cannot accommodate the additional load of heavy equipment within the building. Also, a big portion of our floodplain contains businesses that offer either neighborhood services or that are part of the large industrial economy of the city. Many of such businesses, they cannot really be completely elevated or dry flood proofed and may therefore need to prioritize what kind of spaces would be raised above harm's way. So such spaces can offer the necessary support immediately after a storm event and reduce the business disruption overall. The proposal would also enable different types of flood protection measures to be implemented across all areas of the floodplain. This would include allowances for flood panels and landscape berms and their associated emergency egress systems to be considered permitted obstruction in open areas. It would also allow spaces used for the storage of panels to be exempted from floor area to enable on-site storage. And last, in many areas of the city, zoning requires waterfront sites to provide waterfront access. And in a wider range of sites at the water's edge, the grade of such waterfront yard and required visual corridors cannot be modified today. So the proposal would continue to offer flexibility past after Sandy for grading to occur and facilitate other resiliency measures such as soft shorelines to be designed to help account for sea level rise. Now with the last goal, this one is differently than the other ones because they show rules that mostly apply on a citywide level, so even beyond the 1% and the 0.2% floodplains. So the first slide on this goal is about disaster recovery. Sandy really showed us how a storm effects can go really beyond the floodplain, especially across our energy grid. The proposal would therefore allow power systems, including generators, solar energy systems, fuel cells, batteries, and other energy storage systems, to be considered permitted obstruction in open areas across all zoning districts to facilitate their installment. And we know how energy is really crucial when we have an event like that. So in addition, to ensure that all areas of the city can easily provide ADA access, the proposal would classify both ramps and lifts as permitted obstruction in all required open areas to facilitate accessible designs. Another really important issue is how disasters, especially those that require the evacuation of residents, impact vulnerable populations. Nursing homes have populations that require continual medical care, and research shows that this dependency can be strained whether nursing homes shelter in place or evacuate prior to a coastal storm. Therefore, the city believes it is appropriate to limit the growth of new nursing homes in high-risk areas to lessen the health consequences and logistical challenges of evacuating the residents of these facilities. The proposal would prohibit the development of new nursing homes within the high-risk flood zone and other selected geographies that would have limited vehicular access during a storm event. Existing facilities in those areas would still be able to conduct enlargements for modest improvements, including those that help with resiliency. Last, Sandy also showed us that a lengthy process to update zoning regulations can pose obstacles to the necessarily fast-paced disaster response, some of which will be implemented now to help address COVID-19 pandemic and its associated economic effects. The first one would give property owners who hold a special permit and authorization an additional term so they can complete their regional plan of construction on a longer timeline. The second provision would support businesses that do not conform with our zoning use regulations by allowing them more than 2 years, the current limit of discontinuance, to return to operation. In terms of next steps, we are wrapping up in collecting recommendations from borough presidents, borough boards, and community boards, which have to be received no later than January 27. And after that, the project will go to the City Planning Commission and City Council. Now, to finish my presentation, I'll just provide you a summary of the recommendations received from all of you. This past Monday, on January 11th, we saw most of you there, the Borough Board voted to approve the text with conditions raised by community boards. Community boards 1 to 13 voted in favor and community board 14 against that motion. On the community board level, 10 community boards approved the CFR, 5 of them with conditions. 4 community boards did not yet submit their vote. Submitted recommendations include items that relate to the building code, waterfront public access design, requests for more local studies, infrastructure improvements, and subsidies to help advance resilience improvements at the building scale. And we also received recommendations that include ensuring that existing spaces below the flood risk level can be relocated and that parking be located at the ground floor level for buildings on narrow streets. Expand restrictions on building certain uses and also other building types, and improve evacuation plans overall. So now I believe that Joy will present on our Howard Beach. I'm not sure if we're taking questions beforehand.
You can proceed to Howard Beach, and then I'll come back with questions.
Perfect, thank you.
Thanks, Manuela. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. So thank you so much for everyone's time today, and thanks, Manuela, I'll now present on Old Howard Beach rezoning, which is the Queens local action to certify alongside zoning for coastal flood resiliency. Old Howard Beach is a neighborhood that was deeply impacted by Hurricane Sandy in 2012. And as Manuela highlighted earlier, the city has done a lot of work since then to ensure that coastal communities are better protected against flooding. In 2012, following Hurricane Sandy, DCP advanced a temporary emergency citywide text amendment, which was updated in 2013 and 2015 to promote rebuilding to higher resiliency standards. In 2014, DCP launched the Resilient Neighborhoods Initiative to work directly with coastal communities that were devastated by Sandy. The 2017 Old Howard Beach, Hamilton Beach, and Broad Channel Resilient Neighborhood Study built on that work, providing zoning recommendations specific to unique neighborhood conditions and risks, which for Old Howard Beach included enacting targeted zoning treatment to reflect the neighborhood's unique character and long-term vulnerability, updating zoning to make it easier to retrofit buildings, and advancing infrastructure and coastal protection strategies. The proposed rezoning aims to achieve these goals while also leveraging ZCFR provisions to increase flexibility for resilient construction. Old Howard Beach is outlined here in white and is serviced by the A train at the Howard Beach JFK Airport Station. It's a waterfront community north of Jamaica Bay, bounded by Shellbank Basin to the west and Hawtree Basin to the east, which makes it susceptible to flooding. Old Howard Beach is largely within the 1% annual chance floodplain or the high risk flood zone. Portions of Old Howard Beach to the north are within the 0.2% annual chance floodplain, otherwise known as the moderate risk flood zone. The neighborhood was completely inundated by Sandy, with most streets seeing an average of 3 to 6 feet of flooding. Old Howard Beach consists of predominantly low-rise residential buildings, the majority of which are detached single and two-family homes. Nearby Hamilton Beach and Howard Beach are also predominantly low-rise residential neighborhoods, and Cross Bay Boulevard to the west is the area's major commercial corridor and serves as the north-south artery. The current zoning within the proposed rezoning area is R3-2 to the north and R3-1 in the wider neighborhood. The zoning has remained largely unchanged since its adoption in 1961. This slide reflects the housing typology that currently exists under the neighborhood's zoning. As mentioned, the majority of the area is zoned R3-1, which is reflected in the detached homes you see in the top right. Some of these homes have already been elevated to be more flood resilient. Homes along Huron Street, shown in the bottom right, are typically semi-detached in nature and are single or two-family duplexes and are most common in the R3-2 zoning district to the north. Semi-detached homes are harder to retrofit to meet resiliency standards. The proposed rezoning includes a map amendment that's outlined here in orange and yellow, affecting 48 blocks and 1,037 buildings in the area. The proposed rezoning would change the current R3-1 and R3-2 districts into a single R3X district. The contextual R3X zoning would better reflect the typology of the existing housing stock, which consists predominantly of single and two-family homes. Along Huron Street to the north, the current R3-2 district would be rezoned to an R3-1, which is the lowest density district allowing for semi-detached 1 and 2 family residences, and would ensure that existing semi-detached housing characteristic of the street remains in compliance, while also prohibiting the construction of small multifamily apartment buildings. The majority of the neighborhood is proposed to be R3X, as you can see here highlighted in orange. Limiting future development to detached homes will allow for more resilient building standards under ZCFR, as detached homes are easier to retrofit and elevate than attached and semi-detached houses. The proposed zoning, as you can see in the chart here, would not produce a large difference in what's currently permitted. The permitted FAR, maximum height, and parking requirements between the districts all remain the same. The largest difference is that only detached 1 and 2 family homes would be permitted, and the proposed zoning seeks to better reflect the existing housing typology. Huron Street, highlighted here in yellow, would have a unique zoning treatment due to its semi-detached nature. as well as its more inland position outside of the 1% annual chance floodplain. Again, the FAR, maximum height, and parking requirements would all remain the same. The largest difference between the existing R3-2 and the R3-1 districts is that attached homes, which are typically small apartment buildings, would no longer be permitted, though semi-detached homes characteristic of the block would remain in compliance. Old Howard Beach is particularly vulnerable to storm surges and flooding due to its position along the Queens coastline. The proposed contextual downzoning would work in tandem with the ZCFR citywide text amendment to bolster resiliency efforts by limiting future development to housing types that are easy to retrofit and build to resilient standards, as well as retaining the existing neighborhood character. So I've also summarized the recommendations we've received from Community Board 10, and they've recommended that within the proposal, we prohibit community facilities with sleeping accommodations and apply all other restrictions that were adopted under the Hamilton Beach Special Coastal Risk District for future ambulatory, diagnostic, or treatment health care facility developments, including similar floor area limits and maximum floor area ratios for zoning lots containing residential and community facility uses in the district. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Let's stay on that for a second. So did you agree to those recommendations?
We had spoken with the community board in regards to the recommendation to prohibit community facilities with sleeping accommodations. And that's, again, something that came up at the Borough Board meeting on Monday night. And I know Community Board 14 has also had the same recommendation, but we still, DSP as an agency still believes this shouldn't be expanded beyond nursing homes. And a lot of our research on vulnerable populations looked at all the uses within the R2 occupancy code, according to Chapter 3, Section 308.3 of the New York City Building Code. Just due to a lot of the research that we've already conducted, it hasn't been shown that evacuating populations within nursing homes has been effective. So we're still focusing just on the nursing homes at this point.
Now, going back to, and one, I think both of these proposals are definitely a step in the right direction. But in terms of, and you know, obviously I represented the Rockaways, and during Sandy, and there's very little communication with nursing homes in the city. So are you working with the Department of Aging? I mean, what is the strategy in terms of, and I know this is getting off the topic of zoning, but you know, I remember, I think being at Hillcrest High School, and you know, people were dropped off, a nursing home was dropped off from the Rockaways, and then they needed to be transported back eventually, and it was just very little communication. So are all the agencies more adept to dealing with something like this moving forward?
So yeah, we spoke with the Department of Aging on the regard before proposing the restriction on the use, and they concluded that it seemed to be a good idea to do so, to not add new populations in the area. Regarding existing facilities, the Department of State regulates the evacuation plans, and in the case that the nursing home wants to apply for a portion of the residents to shelter in place, and usually that decision comes depending on the degree of, you know, the health situation of such residents. They can only do that for up to 25% of the residents, and it's very difficult to actually successfully apply for that. So when we spoke and we learned all these details, and we heard from the Department of Aging, they supported the restriction for this particular use because of the situation of the residents and their reliance on medical equipment.
Now, how many nursing homes have been built? Are new nursing homes being built in Queens?
I can check that. I did make that map. Let me try to pull it before we end here. But we didn't find a trend in the 1% annual chance floodplain. Just looking back to private applications and dating back in the development that we could trace. So that was one thing we checked to see if there was a trend and if the businesses could be impacted by this restriction for lack of finding other spots. But we didn't see a huge trend on a citywide level. Of course, you know, as we're all familiar with Queens, there are parts of Queens that receive more of this types of facilities in past several decades. But on a citywide level, it didn't seem that this would impact on a great level.
Let's talk about retrofits for a second. And I thought that was there were some good recommendations from the boards on that. You know, are there low interest loans? So you're asking small businesses, you're asking homeowners, and you're you know, we're obviously giving them a green light for special permits or to update the zoning to come into compliance. But the question is, in this economy, how are they going to be able to do it? So has there been thought to ensuring that there are low interest loans that people can take out? Is there some sort of program that business owners or homeowners can take advantage of to come into compliance or to update their facilities? Retrofit.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, and we are receiving that recommendation on a citywide level from other boroughs as well. So it is something that, you know, would be necessary. We know that the costs for these improvements are not necessarily cheap, and so you know, having financial other ways to financially support these retrofit mechanisms, we understand you know, that it makes sense. So we know that the first thing we can do here is really get zoning out of the way, because we don't want to keep sending folks to the BSA. And, you know, sometimes even with the BSA hasn't yet all the different power in the zoning resolution to modify all the different sections. And we found a lot of barriers in that regard when we spoke with communities. So the first step is really to adopt this text and remove barriers out of the way. But regarding existing resources, there aren't a ton of them, but there are some resilience resources available right now. One of them is the Hpd Home Fix program, which offers home improvement loans with favorable terms for low income and senior households. I believe it's up to 60,000 for a single family home and up to 150 for 4 family homes. It's targeted more on the lower density side. And there's also Flood Help NY that really assists with information about just insurance to verify if homeowners are paying correct insurance costs to their homes, depending on the way the home is constructed and elevation, depending upon the design for elevation. So resiliency audits is provided by them, counseling sessions, elevation certificates, which is crucial as a first step to verify if you're paying the correct insurance amount. So I think they also have a backwater valve installation program. So I would suggest that, you know, folks look into that to see if they can apply for those assistance programs. But that's what the city has at this point that we were able to trace.
I would hope that you get that information out. And also I know that there are organizations like the New York City, I'm blanking.
NYCN, yeah.
Yeah.
For New York City neighborhoods.
Yeah, I'm a former board member, but who could be helpful in sort of getting this information out. So I would urge you to really do that as we update the zoning here. I'll just touch lastly on handicap accessibility. So will there be uniformity in the way, you know, this is done? Because I've seen in the past, especially in the Rockaways, where developers, you know, and of course we want handicap accessibility, but they've done it in a way that does not aesthetically look pleasing to the community. So I just want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind as well. And, you know, obviously we want to make sure everybody can gain entrance, you know, in a safe way, especially if they have a disability. We want to ensure that they have that ability, but I just want to make sure we keep that in mind as well as we move forward. That the quality of what is being done is up to a high standard. So I would keep an eye on that. All righty, Irvin, you have any questions? Malik?
Yes, I do. I have just 3 questions. The first question is, if you'll remind me, when was the Hamilton Beach Special Coastal Risk District enacted? or mapped?
That was mapped back in, I believe, July of 2017.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, in terms of the change from R3-1 to R3X, and do you have a degree of non-compliance that this zoning change would create?
I think for the most part, no. The majority of the homes are already detached single and two-family homes. And the point of the rezoning is really just to reinforce that. So we're changing the zoning to better reflect what's already built for the most part. And we didn't want to bring any of the homes out of compliance.
Right, and I guess the Huron Street section that goes to R3-2 is reflection to try to keep the compliance high.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, and my last question, it's just regarding, I know that city planning coordinates all the time with Department of Buildings, but getting back to the borough president's point of the aesthetic and the standards, I guess, will there be, like, for want of a better word, a workshop with buildings to show how the new standards would allow for ADA accessibility to be built in a more keeping with the streetscape of the neighborhood? Is there an ongoing effort to, that kind of coordination?
Yeah, certainly. We, as you mentioned, we do coordinate with them all the time. They revised the text several times to make sure we weren't creating any conflicts between the zoning resolution and the building code. So yeah, we coordinate, especially the floodplain managers over there. That's the main point of contact for us. And I believe that, once the project is adopted, we will do several trainings. I was already part of DCP when we passed the 2015 recovery text. And that was such a different type of, zoning rules that were placed at the time, especially regarding documentation and things like that. So we worked very closely with them. We did a lot of trainings and, spoke with the folks that revised the permits over there several times. So I imagine that the same process will follow this text. It's something that we'll probably target more for when we are close to adoption period, and then we will get into that.
Will the designers from city planning be working with buildings? Just looking back at streetscape and aesthetic.
Streetscape, yeah, certainly. So streetscape, we increased a lot of the regulations as part of this proposal from what we had before. We learned so much from communities that one thing that I remember is that currently porches that are covered are the main strategies that are being used to kind of mitigate and use the points that are required by the current zoning. And we heard that often, you may want to do other types of streetscape improvements that better reflect the character. So actually I have here on the call our senior designer, Greg Miller, who used to be in the Queen's office and now is working with us in the zoning division. And he will be a big part of this effort in coordinating with the Department of Buildings to make sure that the rules that we wrote in are going to be reflected in the permits. We have much more options to reflect different building types and different neighborhoods now as part of the proposal. So I think that we're looking at a promising outcome moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering my questions. And that's all my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, we'll now go to the general public for questions. I will start with Betty Brayton, Community Board 10. Unmute yourself. There you go.
President. Community Board 10, and I am speaking as the chair of Community Board 10 in support not only of the CZFR, which we do support, but particularly I'm here to make comment in regard to the Old Howard Beach rezoning. Community Board 10 reached out directly to all of the affected properties by U.S. Postal Mail. We also presented information at the local civic association Zoom meeting. We received no negative feedback in terms of our reach out. We received no negative comment at the community board's required public hearing. Community Board 10 voted unanimously to support both items. However, we did have a condition that we believe is prudent to include in the Old Howard Beach rezoning. We did the rezoning of Hamilton Beach first in 2017 because that was our most impacted community, and it was, in a sense, easier to do. We worked with city planning on the Old Howard Beach rezoning, and it makes complete sense to do what we are doing. There is very little attached housing in the area south of 157th Avenue, the area between 157th and 156th Avenue, where Huron Street is located. That's a unique block in terms of the context of the rest of the area. We fully agree with that has been proposed there. Our condition relates to accommodations and community facilities that would have some needs within the area south of 157th Avenue. We have an existing senior affordable housing complex, which the community unanimously supported, which is located on 156th Avenue Westfield Boulevard. It is outside the 1% plain. The area north of 157 is, although partially in the 1% floodplain, mostly out of the 1% floodplain, and is not subject to tidal flooding in events other than the type that Sandy brought us. But in terms of all of the area south of 157th Avenue was totally inundated during Sandy. I can attest to that. My own home had 8 feet of water in it. We believe that it is prudent to do in that small area what we did in Hamilton Beach, which was to include language that would prevent any future use of community facilities that would have overnight sleeping accommodations. And we do that for different reasons than Community Board 14 did. Our reasoning is in that area, it is fully residential. There is only a very small commercial area, which has already been addressed as part of the Hamilton Beach rezoning. We believe language for the CZ should be included in the CZFR to extend the Hamilton Beach coastal zone to all of that area of Old Howard Beach and include that type of a prohibition. Our concern is more towards things like OMRDD group homes, which we have supported throughout our district over the years in all parts of our district. We have those types of facilities in other portions of Howard Beach, in Ozone Park, in South Ozone Park, and in Richmond Hill. We are supportive of those types of facilities, but we don't believe that it is prudent to locate those types of facilities in a coastal zone. That area of Howard Beach, south of 157th Avenue, and I can attest to this as a lifelong resident of that community, is subject to tidal flooding, not only from storms such as Sandy, but many of our streets are totally impassable in lesser storms. It just makes sense to prohibit those types of uses in that area. In terms of what we would ask from the borough president, that you include in your recommendation that type of a prohibition and support it. We believe that both of these actions are a good step forward in what we have to do to improve resiliency, and we are supportive of it. So I will conclude with that. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. Thank you.
I have questions for Betty. All right, seeing none, thank you so much, Betty. Good to see you, and keep up the great work.
We are fully supportive of both the actions. They are much needed.
Awesome.
And we thank city planning for working with our community as they develop this.
Thank you. They don't always get it right, but they got it right here.
Sometimes they get it. We just want them to go a little bit further.
All righty. All righty. righty, we'll go to our next, the next individual is going to testify, and that's Mr. Roger Gentron. I hope I said that right.
It's Gendron, but that's all right. I've been called worse.
All right, sorry, Roger.
I've certainly been called worse. I also go by another name at a certain time of year. So I want to thank the board president and of course city planning for working on this. You know, I work closely with city planning along with the community board when we did the rezoning for Hamilton Beach. I'm the president of the New Hamilton Beach Civic Association. I became president February before Sandy hit. So I had quite an education over the last 8 years. I think it's important for communities to know that the city is working with them, not against them, when it comes to what they can do to help protect their home, their investment that they've spent thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars on. Again, I want to thank city planning because, you know, they don't just come in and tell us what to do. They ask. They really came to the community. They wanted input from everybody. And I think as a community leader, that's all you can ask for, is to have city agencies actually work with you. As far as the amendment, I think it's worked well in Hamilton Beach. You know, living by the water is certainly unique sometimes. You know, for years we've had to live by the tide chart, plan block parties, community events based on whether or not we're going to have a high tide, as a new moon, a full moon. You know, I think there are other issues that could go further in addressing those issues. As Betty had stated, you know, we do experience quite a bit of coastal flooding, and it's not just during storms. We have a good amount of sunny day flooding as well. And you know what? Why it's happening and why sea level rise is happening could be debated. Climate change is real. The reason why, it's not for me to decide. But climate change is real, and the flooding is real, and it's only going to get worse. So, and I also agree with Betty when it comes to the and the recommendations of the board when it comes to the overnight facilities. You know, we've had a hard time evacuating the people that live here in single and two family homes, and to put more people into a smaller community, it could just make it even more difficult to do. You know, thankfully the loss to life in Hamilton Beach was 0, and unfortunately there was loss of life in Howard Beach from Sandy. And to me, the more people you put in, the greater that risk. So I fully support the community board's position. As far as the overnight facilities, and of course, since my community went through it already, I'd be more than willing and able to help Department of City Planning and of course Borough Hall with anything that they need from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger, for that. And yes, I agree. You know, this is certainly a step in the right direction, but a lot more needs to be done with DEP, DEC, the feds to really address a lot of these issues. So, so I want to thank you for that. All righty, I think I think we're just about finished. If there are no other questions, comments, or concerns, I think we've wrapped up the public participation part of this hearing. So I want to thank everybody for coming out to our land use hearing today. Our next public hearing will be held February 4th, 2021. February 4th, 2021. And I look forward to seeing everybody then. So